I'm joined today by Craig Brownson, head boys basketball coach and AP Economics teacher at Travis High School. And Craig, my first question for you is, have you ever had any personal experiences with the police yourself that involved either unconstitutional nonviolent harassment or unconstitutional non-lethal brutality?
I have not. I've been speeding tickets or speeding warnings, quite a few times in my 30 years of driving. And you're always worried just because you've done something wrong, or I am, from my perspective. But I've never been worried about safety. I've never been asked to get out of the car. I've never been asked, can they search my car? There was even a time in high school when I was in the back seat and we were out when we shouldn't have been out and stuff like that, got pulled over and cops just let us go. I mean, it was a situation where a lot worse could have happened to us, but probably because we were, some white high school kids in Midland, Texas. Looking back, I didn't realize at the time, but if I was somebody else, that could have transpired a lot differently.
And so your closest circle of white friends, how many of them have stories about being pulled over when they weren't speeding, or being pulled over after dark, or walking down the sidewalk with a group of friends, minding their own business and being asked, a cop pulls up and wants to see everybody's ID? Like your circle of white friends, how often do you hear those types of stories from them?
Never. I've never heard, one of my white friends tell me, hey, you can't believe, what happened. I've never had anybody in my circle, my wife, where that's occurred.
What about your black friends? Because of course you're a basketball coach, and basketball white people tend to have far more diverse friendship circles. What about your black friends? Do you hear some stories along those lines from them?
I do, yeah. Just pulled over for no reason. I had a white friend in college who was dating a black girl. So they, got pulled over and, harassed, just little things like search you, chapstick in your pocket, just stupid stuff that to me, when I hear these stories, I'm amazed because, it's not the world, that I've ever encompassed.
And so it sounds like it's not one or two black friends. It sounds like it's
it's multiple. Would
you call it a handful or a majority amongst your closest circle of black friends?
I would say of the ones I've talked to, I would say a majority have had dealings with the police that have been borderline unconstitutional. And again, I know about, Fourth Amendment search and seizure. I've taught AP government before. So, some of the things that, have definitely been questionable when it comes to constitutionality and just harassment.
And so, based on your experiences and your conversation, a lot of white people, a big problem, a mistake we make is we look only at the murders of unarmed black men, and which is of course the tip of the iceberg. And what I'm wanting white people to do is make the cultural connection between the unconstitutional nonviolent harassment, which is, from my experience, is not literally universal. I've had hundreds of conversations with black men on this topic, and 3 have not experienced unconstitutional harassment. That's 3 out of hundreds. So statistically, rather negligible. But the culture that permits the persistent, nearly universal, unconstitutional nonviolent harassment of black people is the same culture that permits the murders. And the analogy I always use is that part of the reason why we have so much trouble with violent sexual assault on college campuses is because we don't discipline 7th and 8th grade boys when they pop a girl's bra from the back. And the administrators say, oh, it's just boys being boys. And so we fail to make the cultural connection that the nonviolent unconstitutional harassment provides the cultural foundation that permits the brutality and the murders. And so we tend to look just at the murders and try to convince ourselves that this is an isolated problem because we don't see it collectively. What do you think? Do you think this problem should be viewed collectively? Do you think it's isolated?
Oh, not at all. I mean, again, like you said, it's the tip of the iceberg. The stuff, what all happened before we had cell phone cameras. or all the things that don't get recorded because there's not a cell phone camera around or you don't get it out. I mean, we see the worst of the worst, but there's so much, and there's just so much systemic stuff. You think back to TV shows you watched growing up, and Law and Order shows or cop shows, going back old school Hill Street Blues, NYPD Blue. Usually the black guy was the criminal, the cops are the good guys, and you're inundated with these messages at an early age. As a white kid, I was inundated, cops are good. And most cops I've met and had personal interactions with have been wonderful people. But I think this is much more of a systemic cult, like you said, collective issue.
And so I remember when a couple of things that you mentioned, one, the images we absorb. And so many of these images are not intentionally harmful, but like, do you remember the movie Revenge of the Nerds?
Yes. Yeah.
At the end, the scary looking, dangerous black men of Lambda, Lambda, Lambda
right.
show up to intimidate and put the all-white football team bullies in their place. And I love that scene because the football guys were assholes and the Lambda, Lambda, Lambda guys were righteous, picking up for kids who were getting bullied. And so I still love the scene, but decades later, I rewatched that and it's like, well, there's a stereotype that black men are to be feared. Black men are dangerous. And even though that was partially depicting black men in a positive light, the saviors of the bullied class of kids, it's still like there's so much little stuff like that we just don't see. And I'll tell you a quick story. I'll try to make it quick because I've told the story before on these interviews. I don't want to bore anybody who watches all of them. But we had a bunch of New Orleanians living in our gym when Katrina hit. The majority were black. There was one woman behaving inappropriately and belligerently. And I went home that night and turned on the news. And who do you think was the one person they interviewed?
Yeah.
And that was a real turning point in my life. I was already on my path away from being a racist toward being more of an ally. I was already, at that point, I was 27. I was 15 years into the journey. But still, it was like a scene from a movie where like the aha moment occurs and they do a flashback of 1,000 points that should have got him to, and I had that flashback where all of the images, these images I'd seen on the news and you name it. And it's like other than ESPN, because they're based in the North, in the South, like I remember when Ralph Sampson hit Jerry Seaston and the narrative was, in the 86 miles, the narrative was, oh, that big guy shouldn't have picked on the little guy. What they meant is, we don't want black people doing that to white people. And we never saw hockey fights when we were kids growing up in Texas, but if there was a brawl at a football game, it was statewide news, especially if some of the participants were black. And so we really do get inundated and brainwashed with these negative images about black people that stick with us. And of course, it's on us to recognize that and try to deprogram so that we can be more fair-minded. And so I went to an almost all-white private school for 9 years, and then an even whiter private school for 2/3 of a year, then transferred to public school, which I'd wanted to do all along, but my mother's a Smith grad, my father's a Harvard grad, and so the idea of me being at a public school was horrifying to them. But I was into sports, not academics. And so eventually I won. Eventually I basically quit doing my work and was threatening to fail everything, and they finally caved and let me go to a public school. And I remember as I started to make genuine friendships with black people, really for the first time, there was one girl at St. John's K-8, and we were good friends. And then at Kincaid, I was only there for 2/3 of a year at that time. And so I was friendly with black people there. But being there for such a short amount of time, I don't know if there was enough time to really call it a friendship at that point. I later became friends with a lot of the black kids I went to Kincaid with, but I was a neophyte to the school. So it was more friendly than actual friends. Right. So I went to Lamar High School, which is a diverse school. And I started to hear these stories. And it was like, the first couple times I heard these stories, it was a reflexive disbelief based on experiential naivete. I'd never been pulled over by the cops for no reason. I'd never had a gun pulled on me by the cops when I was hanging out at the park with my friends. Like, if you're white and you're at a park, you're hanging out. If you're black, you're loitering. And
Right.
I start to hear these stories, and it's like the first couple of times I heard the story, it was like, this can't be, like, come on, your tags weren't out, like you didn't roll a stop sign, like just the reflexive disbelief, again, based on the experiential naivete. Walk us through your journey. I mean, I know that growing up in Midland, you couldn't have had, a super diverse group of friends in the fourth grade.
No, for sure.
Walk me through your journey, because you kind of nodded your head like, oh yeah, I remember,
Yeah, I mean, Midland, the elementary schools I went with, I mean, looking back, I'm assuming they were 90% white. You never, when you don't know any different, you don't know it's different. But I remember I didn't have a black friend until sixth grade, and he became like my best friend. And that's kind of looking back, you're like, okay, that's when I started to see things. His name was Antoine Smith. We became really good friends. And I remember the first time I went over to his house, like for a slumber, a sleepover or whatever, because he'd come to my house, I'd come to, it was across the tracks, because I'm sure going back to redlining or whatever, that's the neighborhoods. So that was kind of eye-opening to me, when my mom took me over to Antoine's house. He's a great friend, and so you kind of start to see things. The other thing I remember specifically from like that time is we had an old high school that I guess was during the segregated, called Carver High School, but they had, once desegregation happened, I guess they didn't have a use for that anymore. So when I was in elementary, I was in a gifted program, and they sent us a couple times a week over to Carver. So we went to the Carver center to do like special GT stuff or whatever. And again, it was in a different part of town that I would normally never see. And so again, it's just like, okay, a brand new world to me. And then obviously once you get into sports, high school got a lot more obviously diverse in Midland, because you only had two high schools in town. So entry was, and middle school or junior high was pretty much white, a few Hispanics, few, blacks. But once you get to high school, it really started to open up, and you again start to just meet guys who have different experiences. But really, it was really until college probably, and then just the evolving process of coaching. You spend so much time with these kids, and it just you see some of the struggles that they have to deal with, that I never had to deal with, and it really opened your eyes.
Yeah, I feel I said this before, that, basketball white people, I feel devastated when I encounter a basketball coach who's white and clearly an overt racist. And I know you see comments from people who coach basketball, who are on Facebook, and you're like, like, how can you feel that way? It's like I understand and have empathy for being brainwashed, because I was. What I don't understand is when you have an opportunity to develop close relationships with Black people, how can you lack the empathy so thoroughly to not want to learn and do better and deprogram? How frustrating do you find it when you encounter white basketball coaches that are pretty obviously racist as the day is long?
I mean, in today's world, it amazes me, but I'm naive, I guess. But I'm not perfect in that. You were talking about images, and we do a lot in our program to build the culture, and we've talked a lot about kind of toxic masculinity and how society and images that they see as males harms them, because it teaches them that the only thing that's important, or your value as a man, is your athletic accomplishments, your money, and basically.
Okay, so you just started to talk about images we absorb and toxic masculinity, and that's when you cut off. So start back at that point, please.
Well, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, what I was saying is we've tried to be very intentional with our basketball players of pointing out how society, teaches males the wrong things, but we focused on it from a gender perspective and how we want them to be men for others. But I have failed in showing them like the racial components of those images and those things that you and I have been talking about, and how, we portray white people in this, as the hero or the whatever, and we portray the black person as the sidekick or the criminal or whatever. So I need to do a better job of, still continuing to fight against some of those, I think problems like you talked about sexual assault. And I think that's a lot of how males are raised, but I've got to do more from a racial component with my kids as well. And that's part of the learning process. And that's my whole point, is that, as much as I've tried to grow, I still have a ways to go. And that's, it does amaze me when you meet basketball coaches who, I'm assuming for most of these, especially in Houston, you're dealing with 75, 80% black players who still, hold on to, oh, well, you can't wear earrings, or some of that stuff that's just more of a cultural attack more than do-rags or whatever, that kind of thing. Just, you have to grow. It's not, your grandpa's world anymore, thankfully.
That stuff is clearly racially motivated and entirely possible it's on the subconscious level. We've been, for generations, white people have been brainwashed into believing that black people must be controlled. And on top of that, to your point, it may very well not only be a racial issue, because people who are control freaks, personality-wise, do tend to gravitate toward.
Sure.
So it could be a multifactorial issue. But there's no question that our nation, since its founding, and really for 180 years before its founding, we have believed it's of paramount importance to control black people. And these types of generational brainwashing are things that we as white people mostly fail to confront. And what I'll tell you, Craig, is for you guys who don't know, Travis High School is a diverse high school. The basketball team itself, at least at the varsity level, is not in a given year particularly diverse.
No.
And so what I would just tell you, if you don't mind me making a suggestion, is that in your economics class, which is probably a diverse setting, like I don't know like I don't know whether or not like I wrote about this, I've said this. Black people grew up in America as well, and some black people have been poisoned against black people by the same exact images that we've absorbed. So maybe there is a point to talk about imaging in a broader sense with your team. I was just thinking in your class, it may be really an exceptionally good place to have those discussions.
For sure.
And so I'm curious as well, because racism is not just about policing. And the cops are getting beat up right now, deservedly so, because all they have to do is show up to the union meeting, and if all these good cops out there vote for a new union boss, then we can make changes. And yet they never do. Right. So it's like what percent of cops are overtly and aggressively personally evil? I would like to think it's a smaller percent, maybe 1/10, maybe less. But you've got the vast majority of cops who won't stand up and do anything to change the culture. Literally, all it takes is 51% of the cops in each department to fire the union boss. That's it.
Right.
And then replace the union boss with someone who is reform-minded. Because the reality is, we as a society are not going to stop those of us who are on the side of this issue that you and I are. We're not going to stop going after cops until they stop doing things that demand us to quote unquote go after them, right? And so it's a broader issue than just policing. And so I know you've talked a lot about empathy before. You've shared stories in the past about situations that your kids have encountered that were not related to policing. I wonder if you wouldn't mind walking us through your thoughts on empathy and maybe sharing a story or two that just like things that you saw that just made you feel crushed that Black children still have to encounter and deal with.
I mean, I think empathy is like the most important quality we can have as human beings. There's a lot of, characteristics out there, but I think kindness starts with empathy. If you can't be empathetic towards others, and if you can't understand or try to understand their circumstances, then you're kind of lost. There's, trying to think of, situations where cops have rolled up on, I've had players tell me where, cops rolled up with guns out at their house just because of, mild domestic disagreement or, miscommunication about, what was going on in the front yard, they're having a cookout or whatever, things like that. Or some of them are socioeconomic, where you go into a kid's house, or they're telling you about how, they don't have any food in the cupboard. And that's not necessarily a white black thing. That's more of an economic thing, but they really don't know if they're going to be eating dinner tonight. Those are things that, again, I never had to think about growing up. I didn't have a perfect childhood, divorced parents, and both had some financial issues, but I never had to worry where my next meal was coming from. I never had to worry about, police, knocking on my door. So I just think that, like, you have to try to understand. And like you were saying, I think you have to speak out. I think it's up to white people. White people are the ones who can get rid of racism. Black people can't do it. They're the ones who have been, subjugated for so long. It's up to white people to speak out. And I don't understand why white people refuse to speak out. Kind, I've got lots of friends who are just kind, great people, but that still, I don't want to be political, or I don't want to, it's not political, to be anti-racist. It's not political to speak out, for these kids. And so, I think you have to really, like Ahmaud Arbery, I go running. My son goes running sometimes. We never have to worry about, or some white dude's going to pull up in a truck. I've never thought about that. I run, 5 a.m. I've run 10 o'clock at night. I've run in big cities when we've been on vacation. I've run through Seattle, downtown Seattle, whatever. I've never once worried about my safety when I'm out on a run or something like that. So when you see these images and these things, and then you try and think of the experiences that I've had or my kids have had or whatever, it's, I don't see how you can fail to understand the problem.
Well, like you said, it's empathy. And, on Ahmaud Arbery, I often, if I pass, not in my car because I'm too lazy to stop and get out, but if I'm walking, and I'm not much of a jogger, but if I'm walking and there's an open, like, construction lot, I'm curious or nosy. And nobody ever chased me down and murdered me because of that. And it's really a fairly normal thing to do, to want. And there were many media outlets, oftentimes more on Twitter, the Breitbarts, that were accusing him of theft. But the camera shows he'd been in that same site before, and nothing was ever stolen.
Right.
So he's a curious person with maybe he may have been the Tinker Tots kid. And he's like, well, I want to go check out the progress. Well, this is a very normal human thing to do. And, the empathy gap is related to the fact that we still, as a nation, struggle to accept the humanity of Black people. We don't yet view Black people as humans, full humans, which means that we don't view Black people as full citizens, which means that we not only think Black lives don't matter, we think Black rights don't matter. And you asked the question about not understanding. here's my opinion on this topic. Nobody wants to look in the mirror and see an evil person. Nobody.
Right.
And, well, we all recognize slavery was evil. We all recognize Jim Crow was evil. Those of us who know about the Tuskegee experiment, was deliberately injected black men like lab rats with syphilis that didn't stop until the mid-70s,
Right.
9 years after the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Well, if we know about that, we'll call that evil. The Supreme Court didn't even rule till 1986 in Batson versus Kentucky. It was against the Constitution for a prosecutor to systematically eliminate all black jurors if there was a black defendant. That's 21 years after the Civil Rights Act. In 2007, the Mississippi State Supreme Court ordered a review and found the whitewashing of juries was still rampant, 21 years after Batson versus Kentucky. 2011, Bank of America was fined $335 million for flagrantly and systematically discriminating against equally qualified black borrowers, right? And so it's so much more comfortable for us because we don't want to look in the mirror and see an evil person. Nobody does, except for true sociopaths. And so it's so easy for us to say, we agree Jim Crow was awful. We agree Dr. King was a hero. We agree slavery was terrible and lynchings were terrible. But what about all the progress we've made? Right? We don't want to see that we still, on the topic of racial justice, America is still an evil place. And if we can't accept that, then we can't change it. But if we're to admit that on the topic of racial justice, America is still an evil place, then we have to accept that we're evil too, because we're voting for people who continually perpetuate it, which means we're supporting it. And that's just an unbelievably uncomfortable thing to confront on a human level. But it's about 400 years past time that we did.
Definitely. And I think a lot of people who are good-hearted don't know where to start. You know, what they don't realize is a lot of these things are like state and local issues. When you think about, you know, the police, what the police are allowed to do, whether it's chokeholds or things like that, you know, a lot of those things are not national, you know, federal issues. Those are, you know, state and local things that have to be dealt with at that level. And, you know, most people don't participate in state and local elections, so it's definitely something that even you almost become, with all the issues and, you know, COVID and racism, you know, where do you start? You know, how do you make a difference? You know, I've tried to speak out, you know, and I try and vote and things like that, because maybe I can change some hearts or do what little I can, you know, as a white ally.
Yeah, it's there have been, black people have been fighting to change the system for 400 years.
Right.
White people sporadically decide to help. And a small handful of white people desire black Americans to have equal rights and equal opportunity in sort of a longer term fashion. And there's a group called Coaches for Change. It's a college coaches group that I think the founders are going to try to make more of a national movement. And, you know, what I'm pushing them to do is that as a head basketball coach, you may have a bigger platform than you realize. So, like, for example, I don't know if you can get a meeting with your congressperson. I don't know. You might be able to. But I bet you can get a meeting with the police chief.
Right.
Or with a council person. Or with the deputy mayor or something. And so I think that's really helpful. You know, so like if you're a Division I head coach, your congressperson will meet with you.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do is I put together like 32 reforms that could be packaged into federal law. And we're sending it out to the whole group to try to develop consensus. Right? What are the 5 or 6 or 7 things that we broadly agree ought to be tackled? And then put those in a document and try to get every Division I coach in the country to meet with their congressperson and try to push, you know, to get it through. I don't know if that's going to work. I don't know if the police chief gives a shit about what you do.
Right. Yeah.
But there's tons of, whether it's academic articles or think tank stuff. The Cato Institute has a massive resource on policy suggestions to make our inequities in policing at long last be a thing of the past. And so and then I know you're already doing this, but you got a chance to influence young minds. I think your platform, because you're a very humble person, I think your platform's bigger than you're giving yourself credit for. I have found, for example, that if I encounter a racist 16-year-old white kid, I can oftentimes flip him completely around in a matter of 5 conversations because the thoughts are not cemented. Whereas when I try to argue with white people my own age,
oh yeah,
that's a much more complicated topic. And I know you're already using your platform for these things, but just food for thought.
Yeah. Another, you were talking about the list of things. DeRay McKesson.
Yes.
He's put a group together, and they've got like 8 things. They've done all kinds of research on what things actually show that they're helpful. Like more diversity training doesn't really help it. Like what are the 8 things that can be done to, try to improve at least the policing, the criminal justice system. There's a whole lot more that has to be done. And if you look at his stuff, he's got, I'm sure it corresponds a lot to the list that you guys are putting together. Can't wait for aid, or I can't remember the exact name of it. What's that?
Campaign Zero. That's
Campaign Zero, but yeah, his 8 things is like a side thing of that. But yeah, I know what you're talking about for sure. Yeah.
And that's what I would tell you. And every other, I feel like every head basketball coach can get a level appropriate meeting with an elected official, right, or an assistant to an elected official. And so, if you're a supporter of Campaign Zero, I would encourage you to hit the police chief, hit the council people, hit your congressperson's office, and see if they'll sit down with you. And they might, or they might not. But I do know that so if I'm a congressperson and you reach out to me, well, Travis High School is going to have, how many people go to Travis?
This year, probably about 3,000 students.
Okay. And so probably 400 to 500 of them will be 18 on election day.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of votes that Coach Brownson may have a little bit of influence over. And so, I'm going to be more interested in what you have to say than I might if you were just some random bicycle shop owner, right? Because, you have the potential to be an influencer.
Right.
And that's what a politician needs to pay attention to. What are the ramifications if I ignore this guy?
Right.
What are the ramifications if I blow him up? Well, what good can come to me if I listen and help? So that's what I've been, almost every D1 coach I've talked to, head coach I've talked to in the last 2 months, that's been what I've been pushing. Hey man, educate yourself on specific policy reforms, even if it's just one thing. I'm not gonna mention his name, I don't think he's done it yet, but there's a head coach who's is planning to meet with his congressperson to ask that his congressperson support a federal law requiring police officers to carry liability insurance, just like doctors and nurses.
Right.
Because, of course, you set the insurance industry on the case. They're pretty good at assessing risk.
Right.
And you're going to see that. I think it's about 10%. Other people think it's higher. Other people think it's lower. I mean, I have read one horrifying article. It was not a scholarly article. It was more of not literally an opinion piece, but it was more from a pundit than a journalist. But one estimate that I read had the number of police officers who literally belonged to white supremacist groups at 12%.
Yeah.
Now, most of the estimates I see put it at between 2 and 5%, which is absolutely horrifying.
Right.
Because you're talking about as a raw number. You're talking about thousands.
What do we have, like 1.2 million cops in the United States or something? So that's still 1 in 20 of that is, yeah.
It's a massive raw number. And of
Right.
course, a lot of them wind up in positions of leadership of the union, and they are the bullies that people won't stand up to. You know, the 3 cops in Minnesota who sat by watching the lyncher
Right.
lynch, they were terrified of that cop. Now, they deserve to go to prison, and I hope they do. Like, they swore an oath to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution and to protect and serve the citizenry. And they failed that oath, and they belong in prison, and I hope they go there. I also have empathy for their position. They were terrified of the terrorist, right? That murderer was terrorizing George Floyd and 3 police officers. They were terrified of him. But if we had liability insurance requirement, that guy would have had to find something else to do with his life a long time ago, because he would have been absolutely uninsurable.
Right.
His record is horrifying. Long before he murdered George Floyd, it was a horrifying record. And the insurance companies would have been like, you got to go, buddy, you know, because your monthly premiums are going to be about $45,000.
Yeah.
Well, that, of course, is going to be radically more than what he makes. So there's a Division I head coach who's going to push that one simple policy adjustment. The federal government says, we're not giving local police departments any more money until you require them to carry liability insurance. That one little small policy change would be pretty important.
Right.
Now, will that congressperson listen to that basketball coach? I have no idea. You know, I don't know. But I do think that we as, I say we, I'm not a head coach. Y'all as basketball head coaches, I think have a bigger platform and a wider potential ability to influence than y'all realize. And so I also want to ask I put you on the spot and you didn't come up with like some immediate stories. But
yeah, I apologize.
You shared stories with me in the past that were just like, you walk into a restaurant after a game with your black kids, and you just see like the suspicion and what is the like, you know, like those not even dealing with the police.
Right. Yeah.
Just like, you know, you're walking down you're with your son and you're with a black kid on the team, and just sort of seeing like the varied reactions. Can you walk us through a little bit of that? I don't mean to put you on the spot again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess those things you notice, but you almost become used to it. You know, you walk in, you know, somewhere, you take a black kid somewhere, and you know, like you said, you're in a tournament, and y'all go eat after, and you have a big group of black kids coming in to eat together, whatever, and you get some looks. You know, again, 80-90% of the people are super nice, and they're, what are y'all doing? What are you in town for? Whatever. You know, we go out of town for tournaments every year, and so we have to go eat. And you know, the bus pulls up, and we all get out. And yeah, you definitely get you know, a look, or you know, sit in a certain part of the restaurant or whatever, just because of that, I guess, innate fear some people carry of, you know, young black men. Yeah, it's something that I guess over the year, because I've been doing this so long, you kind of just, unfortunately, we become desensitized to it, you know, unfortunately, because we shouldn't, and you certainly can't address it when it's happening. You know, you're not going to you don't embarrass the kid and say, hey, what's the look for? But you just kind of, it's something that you kind of, again, you just live with and accept, unfortunately.
I wonder what the right reaction is in that setting. Is it should we pull the black kid aside that was treated with a little bit of hostility or racism and say, hey man, I want you to know I noticed that, and that's fucked up, and man, I'm sorry that, or are you supposed to shout across the restaurant, hey, you racist piece of shit, fuck off? Or are you supposed to maybe walk over quietly and say, hey, like, you just gave my kid a weird look, and these are good kids, and like, they're humans, and that stuff is hurtful. And I wish that you wouldn't. I wonder what the right reaction is to those sort of constant, because it does feel normalized, and it's like to a certain extent, it's like on the old game show, like behind door A is $1 million, behind door B is a pile of shit. But it's not.
Right.
But there's not necessarily $1 million behind door A here, and so it's like I wonder what the right, like I wonder what we're supposed to do. Like,
I mean, yeah. Like me personally, my history is more to just talk to my kid. You know, my player. I'm strangely enough a very non-confrontational person. When you grow up with two parents who don't like each other, I guess you kind of that's what shapes you. But so that's kind of my nature, and so and that's bad because I think sometimes you have to sit. You know, things need to be said when you see something instead just like they're ignorant. You know, it does have to be addressed because I don't know if addressing it's going to change it. I mean, it's the same stuff you see out there with protesters and stuff like that. And let's not get into the Trump stuff, but I don't know if I'm going to change some of those people. So I should probably say something anyway.
I don't either. I've been, when I tell you I don't know the right thing to do there, I don't know the right thing to do there. I know what my inclination would be, but I'm not sure that would be productive or wise. You know,
well, it's probably best for us as white men to talk to the kid and ask or talk to our black friends because I think too many times we assume that we know what's best instead of like, well, what's going to make you feel, comfortable? Would you ignoring it, addressing it? I think sometimes we talk too much. And you're you doing this is amazing because you're listening. And that's what I think we all have to do. That's what I've tried to do since all this has come down with my kids. I should have been doing it much more, for years, and just listening to their stories and just, hearing from them.
Yeah, I've been saying, not a phrase that crossed my mind until relatively recently, but what I've been saying for the past 6 weeks or so is, because people are asking, like, what can we do? What can we do? And to break it down in like really simple terms, the two things are listen to black people and talk to white people. Right? It has to be both. It's not because the people who are listening to black people like you and me aren't the ones who need to as aggressively as a lot of other white people do. Because we've been listening to black people for quite some time. And so the people who are new to the bandwagon or new to the just jumped off the fence, into the yard of righteousness instead of the yard of bigotry, but they've been sitting on the fence for decades. And that's about 80% of white people, in my opinion. I think that I think 10% of white people are the really hardened, evil racists who actively wish harm and have ill will toward black people. And I think about 10% of us are like, come on, guys, this is still fucked up. We have to do better. Come on. Like, man, it's been like, it's still happening. Open your eyes. It's still happening. It's not isolated. It's not a long time ago. It's still happening. Please. And then 80% are like, well, the blacks are 600% more likely to commit homicide. So, like, they make some good points in the racist yard too. Let's not like you make some good points. They make some good points. Like can't we meet in the middle? And it's like, no, there's just justice.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground for.
Well, it's always like making the excuse. Like Tamir Rice is shot by the cops. Well, he had an airsoft gun. That kind of stuff is. I'll tell you a story I was just thinking about. I have a player, man, I coached him. He's in his 30s now. So when he probably graduated 99, 2000, something like that. He's a pastor in Atlanta. And he has a church. Just a great, great young man. I've known him since he was 14 years old. And people have to educate themselves. He got so many people, whites reaching out to him and wanting him to tell them the answer. So he came up with a form email and like here are the books you need to start with, you know, because they have to discover this. You know, you can have a dialogue with someone who's already got and is already, I guess, awakened to what's going on. But he was just tired of having to be the one black person, you know, because he's the pastor of the church. And he was like, okay, start with these books, you know, once you've read, you know, 13th or Stamped or whatever it is, you know, and you've got some of this knowledge, now we can have a conversation about, you know, and he was just worn out by it, because they wanted him to give the answers rather than them finding it for themselves.
Yeah, my closest black friends who I met at Trinity University in particular, which was a majority white university, yeah, they're exhausted.
Yeah,
they're exhausted. And to any white people listening who are sort of heart in the right place, but kind of badgering black people to, like, you know, fix me. Just keep in mind that we've been asking black people to do the work for us for a long time. And so I'm not sure that now's the right time to continue that trend. And to your point, I'm trying to put together a list of, like, YouTube thought leaders who are current. Because what I'd been doing was sending white friends of mine who want to do better. I've been sending them to James Baldwin, and Stokely Carmichael, and Malcolm X, and Paul Robeson. But it's occurred to me recently that because white people, again, don't want to admit we continue to perpetuate evil. So because we don't want to admit that, we like to say that stuff doesn't happen anymore.
Right, yeah.
And so black people know that the things Malcolm X talking about, and Stokely and everybody else, black people know that shit is every bit as relevant today as it ever was. You know, you look at the reaction of, you know, Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised the fist, kicked out of the Olympics. Colin Kaepernick takes a knee,
right,
kicked out of the NFL. So we give ourselves credit for making a lot more progress than we have. But because I know that's the mentality of so many white people, that look how much better, we just had a black president, look how, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da, and just the constant, unwarranted self-backslapping. I don't like sending them to those guys anymore, because it's just too easy to say, well, oh man, it sucks that stuff was happening then. I'm on Malcolm X's side. No,
yeah,
it sucks.
The police aren't fire hosing anymore or whatever. Yeah, read the new Jim Crow, or read Ibram Kendi, or read some of these. I can't ever pronounce his name, but Tanasi Coates, his first name. You know, read these guys, I think you'll get
go to YouTube and search police brutality.
Right.
There are thousands and thousands and thousands of views. And then when you watch those videos, resist the urge to wonder what happened before the video started.
Right.
Resist the urge, because the reality is one of the worst videos I've seen that did not involve anybody's death was the 14-year-old black girl at the pool in McKinney, north of Dallas.
Yeah.
And she was being sassy toward the cops. Well, since when does a child being sassy to an adult warrant a body slam onto the concrete? And it's like, so many white people are like, well, she shouldn't talk back to the cops. Yeah, no shit. She's in a fucking hospital. She obviously should. But is that really your focus here?
Right.
Like, that's really and it's like you look at the extent, the amount of people who will defend the police no matter what is horrifying. And the reason why, I don't know if you ever thought about this or not, but the reason why we exalt the police in America on a pedestal even above soldiers is because soldiers protect us from far away unseen threats, and police protect us from the blacks. That's the reason why. And so when the when the cop slams a little black girl, they're fine with it. Did you see the cop swinging on the Naval Academy grad who was white in Portland?
Nah. Oh yeah, the dude who didn't even go down. Yeah,
The humiliated
and
that punk.
Yeah.
Yeah, humiliated that punk who was richly deserving of being humiliated. But I have friends on the political right who look at that and say, look, there's a riot going on. It's unruly. Like, that's not the time to go up to the cops and start berating them for not upholding their constitutional oath. And I say, okay, I can agree. It's risky behavior during a tense situation to go and verbally berate somebody who's armed, whether they're a cop or not. I concede that point. I agree. Will you concede the point that that motherfucker had no right to physically assault and mace someone for literally exercising their First Amendment rights?
Yeah.
Since when do the cops have the right to brutalize? They smashed his hand into 40 pieces. They pepper sprayed him. And he was not physically threatening them. He was wagging his finger at him saying, you guys are out of pocket. Y'all took an oath. I took the same oath. You're wrong right now. You're wrong.
Right.
And so they start swinging on him and they pepper spray. What country do you swear allegiance to where that's okay? You claim to be a patriot, and yet a violent reaction to an exercise of free speech, a violent police state reaction to an exercise of free speech. And again, I understand the reason why. It's because we are raised to believe as white people, the cops are protecting us from not just bad people, but black people.
Right.
So consequently, on a subconscious level, we seem willing to give them a pass for just about anything. And it's just, it's frustrating and it's disheartening.
Yeah, the guy in the Wendy's in Atlanta or whatever, and you're like, people were like, well, he shouldn't have run from the cops, so they shot him. Well, that's not who are they to give a death sentence to this guy? You have his address. Just go to his house the next day. We don't need armed. That's one thing that I've learned a lot about this. Only 5% of crimes are violent crimes in the United States. We don't need, every policeman does not need a gun. Most of these interactions with the cops, they don't need to be armed. We need social workers. We need, in other countries, they have to check out a gun, or you have certain armed response units. Here, they're all armed and ready. And so these little things that could be solved much easier end up in, getting escalated. And that's something I've become aware of. And you're just like, why don't they just go pick the dude up the next day at his house and, give him his, what's he going to, you don't need to shoot the guy. What's he get, that's just that mentality. And I know you and I differ on gun control. And I think part of the reason they have to be armed is because, we're allowing every Tom, Dick, and Bubba to have an AR-15, which I disagree with, but our gun culture, I think, contributes to all this. And that's why these cops want to, become these citizen soldiers and look like G.I. Joe and prove that, their toughness or whatever it is.
Yeah. And the number of times that I see like I've been nosy and curious and gone into construction sites to check it out.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
I've never been chased down and murdered. I have passively resisted arrest drunk. Passively as in, don't touch me, not don't touch me, right? There's, we have a 5-yard penalty and a 15-yard penalty for late hits in football.
Yeah.
Like we clearly need to update our laws on resisting arrest. Doing the get off me and stepping away, that's not felonious behavior. And I've done
so much of it's discretion, right? And that's part of our problem is we give the cops and prosecutors discretion. And so they see, okay, these black kids doing drugs or this black neighborhood where there's drugs, let's go to that, talk about the war on drugs versus the white fraternity party or the white kids at Trinity University doing drugs. There's a different they have lots of discretion in applying the laws. And I think that's a lot of the problem. They have discretion on whether they charge you with resisting arrest, right?
Yeah, they have discretion on just about everything. And
Right.
I'm not against discretion. I'm against discretion being applied unequally. I
Right.
think you're in the same boat. But like,
Yeah.
I've passively resisted arrest from the cops. I never swung on a cop. I never shoved a cop. But I've passively resisted arrest. They're trying to put me in handcuffs, and I pull my hand away. I've done that drunk. And they didn't pile on top of me and murder me like they did Eric Garner.
Right.
Right? He was passively resistant. He did not physically assault those cops. He was saying, "Man, come on! I'm just like
selling a cigarette."
And I've we had BB guns in our neighborhood in Houston in the '80s all the time. The cops went by us all the time. Most of them would do the fake gun and like wink at us, like, "Hey kids, like, stay out of trouble. Don't hit any windows." Right? They never one time did they. Did they hop a curb and murder me within 1.5 seconds of arriving like they did Tamir Rice? I've been in academy back in the day, playing with an air rifle, checking it out, pumping it, seeing which one I wanted to buy. A cop never MacGyver rolled into the aisle and murdered me, like happened to John Crawford. I've been pulled over by the cops and told him, "Hey, by the way, I have a firearm in the car, just so you know." And I didn't get murdered for that, like Philandro Castile did. And it's like, there's so many examples where my behavior did not result in my murder. And black people in similar, or in some cases identical scenarios. Like, we had our pellet guns, pointing them at, we're 13 years old, the 8-year-old kid walks outside and we point it at him like we're going to shoot him, which we wouldn't have done, which Tamir Rice wouldn't have done. And nobody hopped a curb and murdered us 1.5 seconds after arrival. And so it's like there's just this, almost every time something like this happens, I can look back at my own life and see a situation where you were a way better kid than I was. I doubt you ever had a drunken interaction with a cop where he tried to cuff you and you pulled away. But I have. And you probably didn't point pellet guns menacingly at your younger neighbors either. But I didn't get murdered for any of these things. And Tamir Rice and John Crawford and Eric Garner and Philandro Castile and Rayshard Brooks, I don't remember ever. I've had an interaction with the police where I was blacked out drunk, where I've woken up in jail and wasn't sure how I got there. So I may have run from the cops and gotten tackled instead of shot, but I don't have that recollection. But the majority of the time when these things happen, I can point to an experience in my own life where I did something similar or identical and that didn't happen. And it's like I just hope white people open our damn eyes, because we owe it to black people, we owe it to our nation, we owe it to our own souls to really fight for our nation to live up to our ideals. We have glorious ideals in this country, really genuinely glorious ideals. We just don't live up to them. And God, I sure hope we start to.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's, you're talking about your examples, like the Ahmaud Arbery thing, walking into houses. I live in a newly developed neighborhood. And so I remember my kids and I would go for bike rides, and I never thought I was trespassing. You walk into houses. We walked into Fort Bend ISD Elementary School when they were building it, just to check it out, just because you're curious. Because one of the things I wanted to be when I was a kid was an architect. So I think it's cool walking through and imagine what this room's going to be and all that. Nobody ever called the cops. And that was the first story I told our players when we Zoomed after it. I said, look, I haven't had the experiences you guys have. What I can tell you is this experience that I had, where I walk through houses and we were on a bike ride and we go through, an elementary school or whatever. Nobody ever called the cops on us. Nobody ever, it was never a presumption that we were doing bad. Now, if we look different, I imagine that could have been different. When you check the neighborhood Facebooks and they put something up about the suspicious vehicle. Usually it's not a white person in that suspicious vehicle, that's cruising through the neighborhood or whatever. So, it like you said, hopefully it's up to us as white people. Black people have given their lives for this cause, for like you said, hundreds of years. So it's up to us to do our part, to make the changes necessary.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And, you and I don't know if we've had the specific talk about white privilege, but like the part of white privilege is that after Ahmaud Arbery was murdered, you're still not afraid to walk into an open construction site.
Right.
Whereas every black person in America is like, okay, that's one more list of things we can't do. And so I guarantee you that curious, kids like you or like, that did the Tinker Toys and wanted to be an architect and liked Legos and, or maybe when you were a kid, you swung hammers in the summertime on a construction site. And
right.
It's just like, well, there's one more list. Add that to the list of things that black people are now terrified to do.
Well, and as a parent, I've never had to have the conversation that all black parents have to have with their black children, about cops. And, we talk about when you go out, make good decisions and all that, but I've never had to, I'm lucky enough that privilege that I don't have to worry that they're just going to pull them over because they're with a bunch of black kids in the car. They're not going to pull over the group of white kids in the car probably, or even the mixed group probably. So, because I've got 2 high school boys. So that definitely something you think about especially when I talk to my players and they're like, yeah, we had the talk, I'd have the talk with my dad, not the talk that, but the police talk,
Yeah. And I've had it really drives me crazier how many white racists will say, my parents taught me to respect the police. That's the problem. They're not taught to respect the police. No, your parents did not teach you that. Unless your dad was a cop. Then I'm sure you probably get the talk of the cops are righteous and you respect them. My parents never taught me that. I don't have any white friends whose parents sat them down to specifically have the talk about the importance of respecting law enforcement. Did your parents have that talk with you?
No, I guarantee black kids are having that conversation though. That's the funny thing is they're having that conversation.
All of it's horrifying to hear. Corey Henderson?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how well you know him, but you'd love him if you don't.
Not well, yeah.
He talked about how when his father taught him that when you get in the car, the first thing you do is put your driver's license and your insurance and your registration in the visor. In the visor. Not in your pocket, and definitely not in the console of the glove box.
Right.
Definitely not there. And that way, if you get pulled over, the cop will see you reach up, and a gun is too heavy. The visor would flop down. So the cop sees you look up. You grab your ID and registration, and then you put both hands on the wheel. You roll the window down. You put both hands on the wheel, holding your license, registration, and insurance. And when the cop asks you for them, that's when you do not reach into your pocket for your wallet. You do not reach into the console for your insurance. You do not go to the glove box for your registration. And it's like the fact that these conversations need to occur is horrifying. My parents never had that talk with me.
No.
Ever.
Well, and then even when they do what they're supposed to do, Philando Castile told the officers he had a permit, for a license. It's, he still gets shut. Like, what are you supposed to do then when you do everything right?
I'm glad that up because it's another frustration of mine. And I guess we got to cut this off in just a minute. I think you and I could talk
our Zoom limit. Yeah.
Time. But oftentimes a white person will look at an uncooperative black person who got brutalized or murdered and say, well, that shouldn't have happened. That was wrong. But why didn't he cooperate?
Right.
Why was he so uncooperative? And I talk about this before in these interviews, what I want white people to understand is that we don't cooperate with the cops when they try to violate our rights. Go to YouTube and search, and you're going to see tons of videos of white people with the window barely cracked,
Right.
saying, "This is an unconstitutional stop. I wasn't speeding. I'm not giving you anything." And the cop's like, "Well," and the white person says, "Am I being detained? Am I being detained? Am I being detained?" And all these, there are hundreds of them. All these videos,
Right.
the cop eventually is like, "Oh, this isn't worth it. You know, fuck it. I'm gonna move on. This guy's a lunatic."
Right. Yeah, like there's bigger fish to fry, right?
And it's like it's like if the cops try to violate a white person's rights and we don't cooperate, that's viewed as patriotic. And if the cops try to violate a black person's rights and they don't cooperate, that's viewed as disrespectful. And because it's viewed as disrespectful, any consequence the cop chooses to mete out on the spot with no due process, we as white people are like, "Well, he should have been cooperative," and then that wouldn't have happened. And I don't know if you saw the video that recently resurfaced from, I want to say, Virginia, where
Yeah, the guy who was pulled over.
Yeah, and got pulled out of the car.
Right. And he wouldn't get out. And so they finally reached into that one. Yeah.
And there are, I have never seen a video of a libertarian-leaning white person doing the window cracked, go fuck yourself act, and had the window popped and been dragged out of the car. I've never seen one of those videos that ended that way, ever. And I can tell you that I've been pulled over 3 times unconstitutional. I was not speeding, tags worn out. But all 3 times I was in a black neighborhood. So even when the cops are violating my rights, it's based on racism against black people.
Right.
Because they can't figure out there are no non-nefarious purposes in their minds why a white person would be in a black neighborhood. Racism is so embedded in the police culture, it never occurred to them I might have a black friend or a black girlfriend, or there's a restaurant in the neighborhood I like, or I work at a school in the area. I used to work at Yates. And one of the times, at least, when I got pulled over, it was because of that. And I read the cops the riot act when that happens. Say, you pulled me over because I'm in a black neighborhood. That's it. Can I have your ID? You can't have shit. Shut the fuck up. I'm talking. I have a First Amendment right to freedom of association. I have a Fourth Amendment right to privacy. You're out of pocket, and I'm a dues-paying member of the ACLU, and I want to ruin your fucking life. You have 30 seconds to get out of my face. 30, 29, 28. I've never been pulled out of the car. You know what happened? They walk away. They leave. Like, whoa, ooh. I guess I pulled over the wrong white guy today. And they leave, and that's that. Well, black people don't have those experiences. Like if a black person tried to when black people try to aggressively assert their constitutional rights, the police could not possibly care less about those about black people's rights. And like I said before, until we see black people as humans, we won't see them as citizens. And until we see them as citizens, we won't value their rights. Until we value their rights, we won't value their lives. And there's just there's a linkage between these things that we as white people have a very hard time admitting and accepting, and an even harder time being willing to try to do something about it. So Craig Brownson, my friend, I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you, Pete.
We will continue these discussions as we always do. And I continue to insist that you're costing me millions of dollars by not doing the Growing Up Brownson, a reality TV show that I was planning to be executive producer. So I'm still a little bit sorry to you.
I'm just going to write a book of all these funny stories. I need to put them all down. I should have been using my COVID time more productively and writing a book.
You'd be a volunteer basketball only coach because we'd all be rich. We'd all be rich.
There you go. Well, and Jen wants to say hi. She wanted to make sure I said hi.
Yeah, so. Please tell her I said hello as well.
I will do.
And I love it. It makes me feel very hopeful knowing the way that you and Jen have raised Jacob and Nathan. And it makes me feel hopeful in general. It's like the percent of white people who are teenagers who are committed to race-blind equal justice in America. It's that percent is so much higher than it was in our generation. It's like, I know you feel like sometimes you're out on a very lonely branch all by yourself, trying to engage with white racists. And it's like the cavalry's coming. You know, when Nathan and Jacob and their group of friends, because of Nathan and Jacob and other younger people I've met, I used to say there's no way I'm going to see America make it to the top of Justice Mountain. You know, we started at the bottom. Some would even say we started in a mine underneath the mountain.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've made it about a third of the way up the mountain, which means we have 2/3 of the way to go. And the last third, when we think about mountain climbing, is always the most precarious third.
Yeah.
But it makes me feel hopeful that I might live to see our nation reach the top because of parents like you and Jen raising kids like Nathan and Jacob. So thank you for your good work, my friend, and we will certainly stay in touch.
Thank you, Pete. You too, man. Take care.